So, for my discussion, I watched a webinar called Racism and Privilege in the Everyday. They talked mostly about the Indigenous community and how there are still gaps between Canadians and Indigenous people when it comes to health, education, housing, and poverty. And I think as educators, we can really learn from this stuff. And with being aware that there still is some differences instead of ignoring it and thinking everything is just all fine. This webinar was created to learn about National Indigenous cultural safety. At one point, they showed us two pictures. One picture was people in a circle, like smiling, all happy, dressed in Canadian colors, red and white, and had like painted faces with the Canadian flag on it. And it's supposed to represent like Canadian pride and all that. And the next picture that was beside it was a magazine cover that actually exposes the reality of being Canadian, and the situation in where Indigenous people are still not treated fairly and looked down upon. So comparing the two, it was like not everything about Canada is something to be smiling and proud of when racism like this still goes on, and there are still differences that we need to figure out and be knowledgeable about. One thing that stood out to me in this webinar was when the woman said that cultural safety is more than just learning about the culture. So if you go online and you watch a movie and about Indigenous people, yes, that can open some sort of light into what goes on, but her point was that cultural safety isn't just reading something or watching something about someone else's experience. It's a long process that we need to learn, and through our own experience as well, and we need to take action into being knowledgeable about this and thinking of ways to support Indigenous people and people who experience racism on a daily basis. And by continuing to learn about this stuff, by not just watching one video, not just by reading one article, but we need to, it's a process, so we need to go on a long journey in order to really understand what's going on in the world, and be aware of our surroundings and what goes on. Another thing that they talked about was different types of racism, and one of them that I've heard before was colorblind racism, which is where it's kind of a controversial topic where people say, oh, I don't see color, I don't see this, everybody is the same, like I don't even notice that, like to me that's not an issue. But that's actually ignoring the problem and pushing aside the issues that goes along with people being different races and the mindset that everybody else has towards that. And we can't just say, no, I don't see that, because that's us just kind of ignoring the issue and putting it aside and not actually facing the reality of what goes on. As children, they talked about as when children grow up, children are not born racist. Children learn through society and influences that basically influence them to have a certain mindset about this. And as educators, I think it's important for us to be knowledgeable about what goes on in the world surrounding Indigenous people, and acknowledge, the first thing they did in the webinar was acknowledge their land and acknowledge the people that created their land. And I've also seen this in our classes. There's always some post about this at the beginning, which I think is very important to do for everything as a Canadian. Just sort of acknowledging our land and how it came to be, and acknowledging the people that come with it, and teaching children that the history of their country and how it relates to society today.